Hello and welcome to the Business of Story. I'm your host, Mark Howell, and today we have someone from the high-tech ultrasonic manufacturing industry who will show you how he uses storytelling to communicate their big ideas in persuasive, influential ways. How often have you come across someone like this, who leads with logic and jargon, thinking their messages are coming through loud and clear, but they're really actually just muddled and murky?
For a number of years now, work has been proceeding in order to bring perfection to the crudely conceived idea of a transmission that would not only supply inverse reactive current for use in unilateral phase detractors, but would also be capable of automatically synchronizing cardinal grammeters. Such an instrument is the turboencapulator. The original machine had a base plate of prefamulated amulite. It may also be employed in conjunction with a drawn reciprocation dingle arm to reduce sinusoidal repleneration.
If you're leading your pitches with data, graphs, charts, and stats, salted with a little jargon, then you are that guy, and your message repels versus resonates. Now you can immediately simplify, even humanize your complex messages, so you become immensely more influential when you follow an easy 3-word story structure called the and, but, therefore, or ABT. The ABT Agile Narrative Framework will help you sell more by actually saying less. Learn how to put this messaging marvel to work for you through a quick online course at businessofstory.com/ABT. And stop sounding like a bot to your buyer.
The latter consisted simply of 6 hydrocoptic Marsal veins so fitted to the ambifacient lunar wane shaft that side fumbling was effectively prevented.
I mean, what do you have to lose but the side-fumbling Marsal vein of your current communication that is actually boring buyers? So for simply clearer storytelling, visit businessofstory.com/ABT and start excelling through the stories you're telling. Today's guest had a similar experience of long, confusing communications until he started applying storytelling techniques using the ABT framework.
So the first time I came across it was when I was listening to Michael Stelzner interview you. You know, I listen to a lot of podcasts and they don't always compel me to action. So, but this one did, and I probably started using it in my email communications first. You know, it could just be something really simple where a client might call up and say, hey, we've got a 200 horsepower DC motor driving an extraction fan, and the same bearings failed 5 times in the last year and a half. Can you help me? And I would write a tome back to that person. You know, I've come to realize that most of the times those emails, I put so much effort into it, they probably never even got read. And then I started coming back writing just a short 1 or 2 paragraph. I'd lead in with an ABT. I haven't measured our response rate, but just about everybody I write to writes me back.
Allan Rienstra is co-owner of a 50-year-old technology quote-unquote startup, as he calls it, which is headquartered in Brussels, Belgium. It's called SDT Ultrasound, and his primary role is Director of International Business Development, overseeing sales and marketing in all countries outside of Europe. As you'll hear, Allan is a hands-on company visionary who is equally comfortable crawling around the dark bits of a factory to addressing an audience of manufacturing engineers to get to the root of their problem and find a solution. In 2011, he authored the book Hear More, a guide for manufacturing facilities to implement the use of ultrasound condition monitoring for energy reduction and asset management. Whoa, that's a mouthful. A follow-up to Hear More, entitled Ultrasound Beyond the Essentials, is due out later this year. So the three main areas that Allan and I covered today were really directed by him. Number one, he's going to share with you how he's been using the ABT, but it's all about knowing your audience so you can tell them the right story at the right time. For example, if your audience is a busy executive, know they are already distracted before you begin. You have less than 15 seconds to undistract them so you get your point across. Your story needs to tell them what it is and how it will make their life better, but they don't care how it works. Let me underscore that. They do not care what you make. They only care what you make happen. Story tip number 2, tell your story for the right reason. If your outcome is to brag or position yourself as superior, well, perhaps you should reconsider. The fact that you have an audience of any size is proof you already have their respect. So don't listen to respond. Listen because you care and want to contribute to their solution. And finally, Allan, like me, well, we're both big believers in paying it forward. So if you have a mentor that has whitish hair like we do show up in your life, give them the time of day. Listen to their experience. Not only will you learn a ton from them, but you'll be doing them a big favor because we all like to help that next generation coming up. So all that and more right here with Allan Rienstra on the Business of Story. Allan, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me. This is going to be the highlight of my year so far.
Well, it's early yet, so there's plenty to come.
It is early.
You know, this is really the first time you and I have had a chance to chat. I know you have been using the and but therefore and going through brand Bewitchery and working with your personas and your archetypes and all the stuff around brand storytelling. And you are in the manufacturing world, in the very, high-tech manufacturing world. And I would just love to explore today with you how you are using storytelling to not only grow your business, but talk to, those manufacturing reps and the engineers and all these other folks that you work with when people can get so tied up in the technology and the tech speak that it's really hard to communicate and connect. So I know you found the ABT and some of this other work. Let's dive into it today and just talk about how you are using it. But first, of course, we need your backstory, Allan. How do you find yourself where you are today?
In 45 minutes or less. Yeah. So this is, it's interesting. This is all I've ever done. So this is the only, my dad always worked for himself and he always said he was unemployable. And I think that kind of rubbed off on me. I consider myself unemployable too. So I figured if I was going to make a living, I better figure out a way to find a solution that I could buy at a good price, add my own personal value to it, and then push it out into whatever community and try and change the world in a small, unique way. And so you say we work in manufacturing, and to be really specific about it, the technology that we work with is addressing a broader category, what we call asset management. So really just looking after all of the assets that are in a facility and are critical assets to make sure that the widgets that need to be produced get produced with quality and on time and at the least cost impact to the manufacturer.
And Allan, let's get even more specific. You are in the ultrasonic business. Can you kind of define what that is for us?
Sure. So if someone was to ask me, and they did this for decades, they'd ask me what I do, and I say, "Oh, we have a really cool high-tech company over in Europe. Which is where our headquarters are in Brussels, and we make ultrasound detectors." And then I'd start to tell them how an ultrasound detector works, and then their eyes would kind of glaze over, and I'd realize I was boring them to death. So, taking a cue from brand Bewitchery. Don't tell them what you do. Tell them how you make a difference. And so what ultrasound does is it gives maintenance and reliability technicians in manufacturing superhuman hearing. It gives us the opportunity or the ability to hear things at a level that nobody else can hear. And if you've ever walked into a manufacturing plant, whether it's a power generating station or a car facility or whatever it is, it doesn't really matter what you make. We service all manufacturing. But those are noisy places. Those are places with in excess of 105, 110 audible decibels of background noise. And so it's really difficult to walk into one of those facilities and just listen to a motor or listen to a pump and say, oh, that one's good and that one's bad. What ultrasound does is it gives us the ability to screen out or filter out all of the noise that we call parasite noise and just hear what's going on inside the asset. And where we tie this, we tie this in terms of trying to connect the dots for people who don't understand what we do. We tie this to medical. There's so many similarities and metaphors that we can draw between what your doctor would do to assess you or the assets inside your body and what we do to assess the assets in a facility or in a manufacturing plant. So that's what ultrasound does. It cuts out the background noise and it lets us hear what's going on inside the asset. And then
so these factories are working. These machines are whirring away, and you are in there checking them real time with your ultrasound.
Correct. That's right. And that's really one of the big advantages is we don't need to wait for a shutdown or a downtime in the facility. In fact, the best time to test an asset is when it's doing its job. So to have it in a shutdown and spin a motor while it doesn't have any load on it, that's not really going to tell us the story. We want to know how that motor is performing or how that gearbox is performing while it's actually doing the job that it was intended to do.
Yeah. So you are the co-owner of this Brussels company, correct? And you are traveling all around the world selling this particular type of technology. How now then, Allan, are you using storytelling in first getting your equipment into a factory and then communicating how it works, how you test it, how you train on it, and that kind of thing?
Well, if we go back in time 32 years ago, that's when I started in this business, and I started off just as a distributor for our company. And just basically covering all of Canada from the trunk of my car and trying to connect with the actual end users of the product. So going into a plant and saying to the millwright or the mechanic or the technician, trying to convince them that this is going to work for them. And so I had to identify, and I was telling you, I've told you before, I was doing this instinctively. I really didn't have any structure to it. I was just naturally telling a story that somehow connected with them. And I think the most important thing for there is to understand what's at stake for them. As I've moved through the 3 decades that I've been with the company, my role's obviously changed. I'm now one of the owners, and I don't do a lot of B2B selling. I more manage our sales channels. So we have 75 countries that I'm personally responsible for. In most of those countries, we would have either a direct or an independent sales channel partner. And so what I find myself doing more and more now is mentoring them on how to connect with the customer. And so that's really where my roles evolved. But storytelling on all of that is really just a matter of identifying who your customer is, what's at stake for them, and then finding a way to connect the dots between, what matters. And it's different. It's different at every facility, and it's different at every different architect. And nailing down exactly who your customer is, I think, is the most important first step. Because if you don't know who it is, then how can you know what's at stake for them?
Yeah, what problem you're going to be solving on their behalf. When did you realize that you were doing storytelling and it was working for you, but that maybe you needed to amp up your game a little bit?
I would say it was like 2016. We were doing a sales meeting. We brought all of our channel partners into Ghent, in just outside of Brussels. And I was doing a presentation on how to connect with customers. And I I was just telling people, I was just trying to explain to them how I did it. And afterwards, one of the guests that we brought in to talk on an entirely different topic took me aside and said, he pointed out all of the things I was doing well, but then I realized just after that he was really just buttering me up for the for the contradiction. He was, you're doing this really, really well, but there's a lot of things that you could do a lot better, and let's go have a beer and talk about it. So,
he used the ABT on you, huh?
Yeah, and he probably didn't even realize he was doing it either.
Exactly.
So a few Belgian beers later, we dove a lot deeper into it, and then that's when I started exploring. And during the pandemic, we had lots of time to explore, and I really hadn't done a lot of podcasting either, listening to different podcasts. And I found myself, I started doing my own podcast during the pandemic, but I started listening to a lot of others. And I actually stumbled across you because you were being interviewed on another podcast. And that's how I learned about you. And then I ended up buying your book. Brand Bewitchery, and there was another book that you'll have to remind me of the title of it. The Narrative Gym.
The Narrative Gym for Business, all about the ABT.
Yeah, and then of course I jumped online and did your courses, and then. But I think it was on Michael Stelzner's podcast where I first heard about you.
Oh, for Social Media Examiner. For social media marketing world, probably how to sell more by saying less, perhaps.
Exactly. Yep. So that really began my study and my transition from doing things instinctively to doing things more structured and more planned. And holy smokes, what a difference! I mean.
Well, we always talk about moving from an intuitive storyteller, which we all are as Homo sapiens storytelling apes. It is intuitive to the way we plan, organize, act, but in sales, marketing, training, as you've experienced and so forth, it's not enough to be intuitive. You have to be intentional about it. And I learned it my own hard way. I mean, running an ad agency, I'll never forget it when we had produced these 2 TV commercials for Goodwill of Central Arizona, and Allan, one of them pulled phenomenally. I mean, they had like same store sales go up by 42% the next month. The other one didn't pull at all, and when I looked at them, I couldn't figure out why, because I had not done my storytelling studying at that point. In hindsight, what I learned with structures from the ABT and the 5 primal elements of a short story, that first spot was absolute perfect story structure. And that's why it worked so well. We just lucked into it. We didn't even know what we were doing. It was intuitive. The second spot was simply just a creative, aren't we so clever? This spot is so cool, but nobody got it because it was meaningless. There was no narrative to it. And that was my major aha moment of just think about how much more powerful we can all be if we became intentional storytellers, not just intuitive. So in your early career, it sounds like you were already a very natural intuitive storyteller, and it was just working for you. But maybe that first gentleman kind of started revealing it to you, saying, hey, there's more structure that you can bring to it so that you can actually evolve into that intentional storyteller, which you really have done over the last year since I've gotten to know you.
Yeah, and you've been a tremendous help on a lot of, I'm writing my second book right now, and a lot of that book is made up of case studies, which are essentially success stories from our own clients, and just sticking them into the book without any purpose. I sent one to you about one of our customers in Western Canada who runs a sawmill, and I still remember one of the main criticisms or critiques you gave for that was that I wasn't putting enough context into what the consequence was for him and his sawmill if he didn't get it right. I went back and did a rewrite, and the whole rewrite was pure genius, because when before the pandemic, we were always trying to sell our technology to sawmills, our solution to sawmills, and the sawmills really didn't want to give us the time of day because they're making 2x4s, which is a commodity, and it was commodities are priced all of a sudden a pandemic comes along and a 2x4 costs $12, and these guys are making money like they've never made it before. Well, all of a sudden, when you have an opportunity to make 5 times the money that you would normally make on a 2x4, you better make sure that your assets can produce 2x4s. That means that the bearings that are supporting your saws better keep on turning, the motors that are driving those saws, and all of the other assets. And so all of a sudden now we've got the attention of not just the maintenance manager and the plant manager and the production manager, we got the attention of the CEO. And if you look at all of those different personas, look at the purchaser. Well, the purchaser's job is to go out there and acquire things or buy the things that they need to make their widgets at the cheapest price possible. Production is just there to get as many 2x4s produced in as short a time as possible. Operations is trying to, connect the dots between production and satisfying customer demand. Plant managers trying to keep things running. HR is trying to keep all of everybody satisfied. And the CEO's job is to make sure that the share price keeps going higher. That's really the reason that the share price, that the CEO is there. If you look at all of those different archetypes that I just defined, well, now I'm like, well, how do I write my LinkedIn copy, or how do I write my book to address all of those different archetypes? And so you could say the same thing to all 6 or 7 of those different departments using an ABT, but you can't use the same ABT. If you're dealing with a company that's manufacturing beer, let's say beer or 2x4s, whatever beer. Let's go with beer.
I'm good with beer.
Yeah, I'm good with it too. If the operational objectives of the company in 2023 are to increase outputs by 10 million cans, okay, that's great. You've set yourself an operational objective, and how are you going to reach it? As measured by what? And so that's where you start to look at, how do I get buy-in across all of those different departments? So, for the plant manager, if he's trying to get funding from senior management for an ultrasonic condition monitoring program, he needs to tell a story to whoever is going to write that check or allocate that budget money that resonates with them. Well, the story could be, if you incorporate an ultrasound condition monitoring program on all of our critical motors and pumps, we'll be able to maintain precision lubrication levels in all of our bearings, and our machines will run without trouble. And that still doesn't do it for them. You need to put the cherry on top of the cake and say, if you let me do that, I'll contribute 20% of those 10 million extra cans that you want to produce this year. And so that's the context that you need to get the CEO or senior management on board. You got to tell a completely different story to the technician who's going to go out there and do the work. And that story might be, if you implement this program, then you're going to spend a lot less time turning wrenches and a lot more time, building out new projects to increase production. The most important thing in our industry is machines are going to break eventually. That's inevitable. But knowing when they're going to break so that you can shut them down and repair them on your own terms. And so when you can spell that out to your maintenance planner, well, now they know, now that they'll know in advance of what bearings and what different components they need to have in stock, what labor they have to schedule, when that labor is going to be called in. Everything becomes proactive instead of reactive. We're not putting out fires. We're actually fixing the assets on our own terms. And when you can do that, everybody breathes a little bit easier. And then there's one overarching thing that always will convince, and that is, we can start to talk about safety. Because when you think in terms of the most high-risk jobs that are out there, you think about firefighters, kicking down doors and coming into burning buildings. You think about police, putting themselves in harm's way all the time. The most likely person to be injured or killed on the job is a maintenance technician under the age of 30 with less than 2 years of experience. And that statistic alone is absolutely mind-boggling when you think a mechanic or a millwright didn't sign up to put his or her life on the line. They signed up to keep the assets running. Police and firefighters, you would expect to see that statistic much higher, and yet it's people that are working in manufacturing, and especially people that are working in a reactive firefighting way, that are putting themselves in greater harm and greater risk than our first responders.
That's amazing. I hadn't thought about that. Totally makes sense, though. So, yeah, you've got a very important job there to make sure that your training is right, is accurate. They get it right up top. Well, you created some pretty intensive training modules back in, 2001, I guess? And when you were doing that work, were you thinking in story at all, or how did you make them so that they were so impactful that they scaled the way they did?
We were. Whether it was the training courses that I was designing for our company and for our customers, or whether it was the books that I was writing that that highlighted the wins that our customers had, I always was keeping in mind my influencers. And I'm not an engineer by trade or by education. I'm actually a history major, and so history is storytelling, right? I guess the point I'm making on this is that it's not enough just to write about how somebody used your technology to save some downtime or to increase their profits. It's got to go deeper than that. And so one of my influencers is actually, I never met him obviously because I'm too young, but was Walt Disney. And Walt Disney was probably one of our first storytellers. So I said, during the pandemic, we pivoted and took all of our training material from in person to online. And we hired some motion graphics people. And if you go through any of our training modules online now, it's really, we wanted to be the Walt Disney of asset management training. And so every slide has some kind of a motion graphic on it that tells a story that connects the human aspect of doing the job to the outcome. And again, we always hit on the safety aspect really hard, because I still think that working safe is the most important thing. Everybody has a right to a job, but they have a right to come home in the same condition that they arrived at work.
Well, it sounds like your training, you really took an approach of entertain to educate. So you're not just droning on and on about what you're trying to train, but if you're taking a Disney approach to it, you certainly are using education, or entertainment, I should say, to educate.
And who are we teaching, right? We're educating adults, and so that's another element of our training. Is every one of our trainers has been through an adult education training course, so they understand that teaching an adult a task or a concept is completely different than teaching it to a grade schooler. And I think that's really important too. And so the biggest thing that you'll take away from an adult training course is that you have to educate through story.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm just about ready to do that. I'm coming to you from Charlotte, North Carolina, working out here with Aeroflow and Motif healthcare company here. And
on the road
what
again.
I'll do is on the road. It's actually working out pretty good. But when I go through the training, I'll do a 90-minute training with them coming up here this afternoon, Allan. And in that, all of my points are made through story. I don't share opinion and assertion. I show it to them in action, because they can argue with my opinions and assertions all day long, but they can't argue with a training that has and shows you the detail and the techniques in action in real-world situations. And I bet you in my 90-minute training, I probably share 20 to 25 different anecdotes, stories. These are not some big, long, epic, tales. These are short little time stamp, location stamp, where did it happen, who did it happen to, let me show it to you in action. And it kind of circles back to your testimonials too, when you're talking about putting your case studies in for your customers. And when we were looking at that case study, this is good for everybody listening, and I believe with yours, it's been a while since I looked at it, Allan, but you were talking to the sawmill. And I'm like, no, talk to the person that runs the sawmill. We actually don't care about hearing about the sawmill. It's the setting. That's important to us. We need to be able to picture the sawmill. But we want to know about that individual. Who is at the center of this story, be it your case study, be it a story you're using for training or whatever. You always want to instill a character into it, like Walt Disney would do, right? And you are telling a story about an individual. When did it happen? Where did it happen? What happened to this individual that had this surprising outcome that makes your business point for you? And when we get caught up in our heads, we default to generalizations, but the power of storytelling, of course, rests in the specifics. I'm curious if you saw that when you were rewriting your case studies, where you really now talked about the person, the man or woman at the center of the story that you helped.
We really did, and I think that it helped. Well, I know that it helped for them to resonate with it, because we saw, and we started to do some of the A to B testing with a lot of our social media posts around that, where we would write the case study two different ways just to see what kind of a result, and whether we measure it in terms of impressions or reactions or just, none of those things really turn me on near as much as when you can get the comments going and turn it into if you can turn a LinkedIn post into a 3 or 4 or 5 week conversation, that's when who cares about reactions. It's all about engagement. And so, yeah, to your point, once we started making it about that customer's particular journey, for example, the sawmill case study that we were writing, it wasn't really about producing more 2x4s per hour. It was about how this particular client had gotten to his role as plant manager, because there had to have been a point in his life where he started as a millwright, or started as an electrician, or started off as, a grease monkey wrench turner. And that was the story that I was most interested to get to. My first attempt at it didn't really pull that out. And then you read the story and you gave me a few pointers, and then from there I made the rewrite. And I think what really resonated there was that so many other clients that are maybe midway through their careers looked at that and they drew inspiration. They said, oh, so that's how Doug did it. That's how Doug got to where he is today. And if I follow a similar path, maybe not the exact same path, but if I follow somewhat of a similar path, I can get there too. Another part, you asked me how I use storytelling in my day-to-day job. And one of the things I do is coach and mentor our sales team. But what I find myself also doing is coaching and mentoring our customers. And again, it goes back to all of those different archetypes that make up the reliability departments of these manufacturing facilities. We have so many different roles at play: production, operations, HR, purchasing, senior management, and then the guys and gals on the shop floor who are doing the grunt work. Everybody has something at stake. But what they don't all have is the ability to tell a story. So if I send one of our sales engineers into a company to solve a particular problem, And he does a really good job convincing the end user, the person who's going to be using the actual technology at the floor level. That's great. And he can walk out of there, but he'll probably never get the order. We'll probably never close that business because now he's left it on the technician or the millwright to tell his story for him up the chain. And so we always want to try to sell from the top. If we can tell that story ourselves, but we're not always in a position to. So I found myself where I started to coach the actual customer, and because I don't want to leave it to chance. It's important for them to be able to convey what's at stake, and they tend to get caught because they're high tech guys and gals. They're the tendency is for them to try and talk too much, to try and sell themselves as how smart they are. And you really only need to address a couple of things when you're trying to sell your idea up the chain. It's tell me what it is and tell me how it's going to change my life. But for God's sakes, don't bore me with how it works because I haven't got time for that.
Isn't that the truth? Your story's not about what you make, but what you make happen in people's lives, Yeah.
And typically, so, Alan, Park, you've only got about, if you're going to try and sell an idea to a senior management or a CEO, you've got less than 7 minutes. And sometimes you don't even have that. So,
well, that's where the ABT comes in, doesn't it? I mean, it gets you super focused on who that audience is because you've got to think about them in advance. Who's that audience? Demonstrate you understand who they are, appreciate what they want relative to your offering, empathize with them why they don't currently have it because they don't yet have your offering, so they're not getting the outcome that they're looking for, and then therefore leading them to the chosen land, the promised land of how you can deliver that for them. When did you first come across the ABT, and what was your sense of it the first time you used it?
So the first time I came across it was when I was listening to Michael Stelzner interview you. And, I listen to a lot of podcasts and they don't always compel me to action. So, but this one did. And so I probably started using it in my email communications first. It could just be something really simple where a client might call up and say, "Hey, we've got a 200 horsepower DC motor driving an extraction fan, and the same bearings failed 5 times in the last year and a half. Can you help me?" And I would write a tome back to that person, and most of the times I've come to realize that most of the times those emails I put so much effort into it, they probably never even got read. And then I would come back with then I started coming back writing just a short 1 or 2 paragraph. I'd lead in with an ABT, and I haven't measured our response rate, but just about everybody I write to writes me back. And we start off, we engage them and we start off down the journey together. So
that's a beautiful thing about the ABT. It's like a Ghostbuster. You can put them in your emails and send them out there. And you don't get ghosted as much as you used to.
The Ghostbuster. I love that. Yeah, exactly. But so then the other element of getting success at the asset management level is, what if you do use our technology and you're monitoring and trending and doing analysis on all of these machines? And really, what you're doing is you're listening to the machine, and then you're letting the machine tell you its story, just the way your doctor is going to listen to your heart and your chest and all of those things. And now you've come to the conclusion that this asset is on its last legs. And the next step is to get action inside your reliability department. So, okay, I've identified a motor. The motor's about to fail. How do I get my production guy to how do I convince my production manager that we have to shut the machine down for 5 hours and do some maintenance on it? He doesn't want to do that because he's got a delivery schedule to meet. He's in the middle of a batch or whatever. How do I convince the maintenance planner that we need to schedule and which parts we have to bring in? So the way we do that is that we create what's called an asset condition management report. And so I started looking at some of these reports that our users of our equipment our users of our solution were writing. And, it's a motor, it's a bearing, it's going to break. And if it doesn't break, if it does break, these are the consequences. So let's stop it and fix it. But they were writing 20-page reports where they could have summarized everything in a paragraph or two. They were filling it full of squiggly time wave forms and fast Fourier transforms. And okay, it made them look smart, but it didn't convey the story to get the action that they needed to shut that asset down. And really, that's at the end of the day, that's what you have to tell senior management. We need to take action on this machine, because if we don't, your share price is going to drop.
Ultimately comes down to it. Hey, can you share with our audience your story of going through the Brussels train? I mean, it just cracked me up because the universe is so weird that way, isn't it? We find something like the ABT, it comes into our lives, and then we start seeing it everywhere.
I can. There's kind of two elements to the story. So our headquarters is in Brussels. So of all the European cities, I reckon I've probably flown into the Brussels airport at least 30 times in my life, maybe more. And I never ever noticed that the terminals are labeled A, B, and T. I still don't know what the T stands for. The A and the B make sense, but why isn't there a C terminal? Why is it a T terminal?
Stands for third.
Maybe it does.
The third terminal.
I'm walking through the Brussels airport. It was last November, and I look up, and there's these 3 yellow signs. I'm with my wife Linda, and she's looking. Why are you taking a picture of the bloody terminal signs? I said, because I got to send this to Park. Park will love this. But there's another side to this story which kind of tugs at my heart, and that's if you look back to, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago now, when there was a terrorist bomb that went off, and when I was taking the picture of the ABT terminal sign to send to you, I was standing right in front of the Starbucks where that bomb had been detonated. And I don't know if everybody would remember that story, but you can certainly look it up and Google it. I still remember the picture of the 2 terrorists that one of them had a white glove, and the other one, he had one glove on his hand and no glove on the other hand, and then the other pictures were just chaos. And so I'm standing outside of the Starbucks, I'm looking around, and I see passengers, I see kids running around, and everybody's excited. They're either landing to come and see grandma, or they're being whisked off somewhere for a business trip, and it's just happy-go-lucky, and nobody's thinking about it. But all I can picture was the death and the destruction that had happened right where I was standing only 4 or 5 years ago. And the part that really shakes me every time I stand there is that I was supposed to fly to Brussels that day. I don't even remember the circumstances around why I didn't, but a week before, I'd actually ended up canceling my ticket and not flying. I'm not saying that I would have been standing there when the bomb went off, but I would have been a couple hours either side of it. And I'd say that's close enough.
Yeah. That is close enough. And it all came back to you just stopping there to take a picture of the ABT terminal signs. Linda saying, what in the world are you doing? But then when you sent me that email with that picture, it was one thing, to see the ABT there. But then when you went on and told the rest of that story, it was quite powerful. So what are you doing now with your storytelling? How are you growing? You are a natural, intuitive storyteller. You're using these tools now. What are the next steps for you and your team?
So I talk about the different archetypes inside of our different customers' facilities, and we have archetypes inside of our own company as well. We're a small company. We're only, I think worldwide, we're only about 60 employees. We have 5 or 6 different contributors to our social media. And so we don't have we don't have a marketing firm working behind us where we know our content better than anybody else. And so I believe that we can write those stories best on our own. Where I'm going next is trying to get all of these storytellers inside of our company telling stories in a more intentional way. And this isn't the last you'll have heard from me. I'll be leaning on you for some support here at some point, and I'm sure you'll be happy to do that. But that's So when I talk about different archetypes, we also have we have cultural archetypes. We have generational archetypes. We have my son Tristan is now heading up our marketing and communications team here in Canada, and he's writing so much content. And that content's being fed to him by our sales guys and our trainers and our technicians in the field. We also have those same content writers, but they're in Europe. And there's when it comes, you'll probably know this from when you had your own marketing firm. When it comes to content creation, you can't discount the cultural differences between European messaging and messaging that might be more suitable for the Asian market or the American market. And so that's going to be a real point of focus for us moving forward, is how can we get all of our content creation geared towards the right audiences, and how do we overcome these cultural differences, the generational differences? Because I know, there's guys in our company now that want to, I'm a LinkedIn guy through and through, and I don't really see the benefit in some of the other platforms for the audience that we're trying to reach. But we're experimenting with TikTok, we're experimenting with Instagram and Facebook, and I'm not 100% convinced that our audience is there, but I still have to give that younger generation an opportunity to prove it. So, therefore, there I go. Therefore, give them some free rein, and let's see if TikTok can, bring in some more eyeballs.
Well, and when you're talking about your different storytelling for different cultures around the world, you said earlier that you work in 75 different countries and help manage those. And I would really love to hear your experience on this down the road. The and but therefore to me works because regardless of the culture, regardless of the language, you're communicating with the Homo sapien. And we believe that same brain, that limbic brain, works the exact same way. Set up problem resolution. It wants a problem solution dynamic. And we kind of tested this with Trimble, who has been around since, I think, mid-1970s. They are a very large software as a service provider to the heavy construction industry. They're in countries all over the world. And we did an A/B test with them in March of last year where they were in 5 different countries, Benelux and France, Germany, US, UK. And they ran their initial campaigns in March, and then their writers did all the content creation for April, sent it to me, and all we didn't rewrite it, we reordered it using the and, but, therefore. For all these different countries, we did the exact same process for each of the different countries. We didn't rewrite, just reordered it using the narrative framework of the ABT, and they had an over 400% increase in engagement. So it goes back to this idea, and I'm just curious because I don't know the answer to this, but would love to hear your experience down the road. It's not as much about content, but about the order of that content. And we have found that there seems to be a common denominator when you use the ABT that translates across all cultures and all languages. I'm curious if you're finding that at all yet, or as you do more of this AB testing, what you do learn in that process.
I'll be able to tell you as early as next week, because just on the wall behind me here, two of my sales channel partners are in town from Japan. We just picked them up from the airport this morning, and they've come in for some product and sales training. And just before I jumped on this call, this interview with you, I was explaining to them I'm going to be busy for the next hour or so. I'm going to be doing a business of story interview, and they're like, "Oh, tell us about that." And so I made it as real simple as possible. I wanted to give them, I wanted to give them some context to the ABT, but then I realized like you make a reference in brand Bewitchery, you reference back to a children's lullaby. What is it? Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet.
Right, eating her curds and whey.
And that's nobody realizes it, but until they really dissect it, that's just a classic ABT. And so I started to explain that to the two gentlemen that are here, and I said, for example, you have come all the way from Japan to learn about ultrasound and condition monitoring, and you've come to the place that can give you the best training for that. But your English skills are going to be difficult, and compounding that, our trainer is Spanish, English, and French, but he doesn't speak any one of those particularly perfectly. Therefore, I've already instructed him to speak extremely clearly and extremely slowly, and to give you lots of opportunity to stop and question. And you could see the light come off, the light go on in their eyes, just like a switch. They go, "Oh, we totally get this." So then I put it into context of an asset management context, and immediately they started to understand. So maybe we'll need to get some of your material translated into Japanese next. It definitely transcended that culture, and if you can transcend into the Japanese culture, then it transcends all cultures.
Well, we're working with Walmart Canada right now, doing a very large Train the Trainer program, and they've translated all the work into French. So we are launching that as we speak, and would love to take this to other languages out there. Final question, Allan. Okay. Thank you so much for being here. What are you going to do next with both the ABT and these newfound storytelling skills?
Well, I'm 95% of the way through finishing my second book. It's called Ultrasound Beyond the Essentials. It's a collection of short stories, case studies, with a lot of technical how-tos in it. So when I say I'm 95% finished, the 5% that I want, because I've been writing it for 3 years, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to start from the beginning. I'm going to read the entire thing through, and I am going to stuff it full of more structured storytelling, because what I've noticed is the early chapters that I started writing pre-pandemic are kind of all over the place, and they're not really contextually resonating with anybody. And the stuff that I've written during the pandemic and towards in the last 4, 5, 6 months is so much more structured. And this is one of the problems with writing a book over the course of 3 years is your writing skills evolve. And so that's a big job. The second one is I actually want to get my son Tristan involved with writing another book. So he's become very good at putting together case studies that are related to him from people in the field. And we've already got the title for the book. And it's just so that'll be our next project after that. And the title for our book is going to be Found by Sound. It's a collection of short stories of people, asset managers, asset stakeholders, asset owners who have found problems with ultrasound.
That's a great title. I love it.
Thank you.
So you've got a lot on your plate.
Lots on our plate for sure. And I'm heading out. I'm heading out in a week and a half with my wife to Dubai, where we're going to be at a conference and we're going to have a Middle East sales meeting, and we'll be teaching all of our salespeople in the Gulf Coast countries how to get the message across using a more intentional storytelling method.
That's awesome. Glad to hear it, Allan. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're busy. You've got some colleagues in town. Really appreciate you being here. Where can people learn more about you, find your book, or just see what you're up to in general?
Yeah, so like I said, I don't really live professionally on social media except through LinkedIn. So Allan Rienstra is you're going to find me pretty. I'm very active of growing number of followers, and I'm pretty much on LinkedIn every day. So that's the best place to find me personally, and you can message me there. You can read some of the posts and articles that we write and put up there. Our website is SDT Ultrasound. That's S like Sam, D like David, T like Tom, ultrasound.com. And that's where you can learn all kinds of stuff about our technology. And then we have a blog website where we post a lot of these stories as well. And that website is wehearmore.com.
I love it. wehearmore.com, and they can see your storytelling proficiency in action there, I'd imagine.
Right. And the whole idea of hear more is because we use ultrasound, and therefore we can hear more than you.
Absolutely. Allan, thanks so much. It's just been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today.
I can say you're welcome, but I'd say thank you back to you because really, thanks to the pandemic and thanks to all the work that you did, I was able to do things differently at a very late point in my career. It's really made a difference.
Well, that's awesome. Always feels good to have that kind of impact out there. So, and thank you all for listening to this edition of the Business of Story. If you liked what you heard, if you happen to be in the manufacturing space, or you find yourself often getting twisted up in tech speak and that kind of thing, share this show. Listen to it again. Share it with your friends, families, colleagues, anyone that has highly technical information that they're trying to communicate and how to use storytelling. Allan's a great example of how they've been able to evolve it at their company there. Of course, if I can be of service to you, come on over to the Business of Story. You can take the exact same course that Allan did. Just visit businessofstory.com/ABT. He was talking about my first book, my textbook, Brand Bewitchery, which came out during the pandemic, actually, June 1st of 2020, I believe it was. And that is all about how to craft and tell compelling stories using the story cycle system to craft your brand narrative. And then the second book you mentioned was the one that I co-wrote with Dr. Randy Olson called The Narrative Gym for Business. It's a crisp 75-page guide on helping you craft your and, but, therefores. And in all of my training, from learning the very complicated hero's journey to the 15 beats of story to the 7-step Pixar way, it really all starts with these 3 words, the and, but, therefore. Those are the DNA of story. If Allan was to put his ultrasound to it and listen to story, the first thing he's going to hear in there is an and, but, therefore set up problem resolution. So when you take the course, you learn how to build your narrative intuition by using those ABTs. And everything, as Allan pointed out, from emails to social posts to landing pages to book writing to instruction manuals, and it works because it's the way our pattern-seeking, cause and effect, decision-making, buying brain chooses to make meaning out of life. Set up, problem resolution, and, but, therefore. Check it out, businessofstory.com/ABT. And until next Monday, when we will have another amazing story artist right here for you, like Allan, Remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make sure that's a great one. Thanks so much for listening. All right, man. That was great. You were awesome.